Hello, everyone. Ready for our next talk? I know I am. Right here with me is Alistair Gray. You might recognize him, actually, from being on College Jeopardy in the Alex Trebek era, and maybe that thrills you as much as it thrills me. Woo! He's currently on a mission to ride every Amtrak in the country. He's gotten the 5 longest, and he's working through the rest in order. And he says he's the youngest Grateful Dead fan that anyone has ever met. And he assured me that he was very young. So that's great. And here to tell us about sociological considerations in designing an internal documentation platform, please help me welcome Alistair Gray.
Thanks, Janine. Thanks, everyone. I am Alistair, as she said. I work at Stripe. I am an engineer on our internal documentation team, which is a cross-functional team of engineers and tech writers. I'm going to talk a bit more about what we do later, but it's great to be here. This is my first ever Write the Docs. I'm a first-time listener, first-time caller, and good to see you all. All right, so this is like the one-sentence summary of what I'm going to be talking about here. We had a set of problems with our internal documentation posture at Stripe, and I'm going to be talking about what the causes of those, what we thought they were, how these problems manifested, and then the solutions that Stripe and our team came up with to solve these problems, and what we learned. Couple caveats, except for Ryan, who I don't know if Ryan's anywhere, but except for Ryan, probably none of you work at Stripe, and every company is different. There are going to be different internal documentation cultures everywhere. So, your mileage may vary, your problems, and the solutions to those problems might very well be completely different. And then similarly, work on internal documentation for us that meant docs by developers aimed at other developers. Those can be a little different from external documentation, like end-user facing docs, which is probably what most of you work on. But even despite all that, hopefully a lot of this is still broadly applicable and will give you a general mindset to think about these problems and their solutions. Yeah. All right, digging in with just a little bit of a context here. So Stripe was founded in 2010 or so. And for many years, it was a pretty small startup. It was just a few hundred people. And when you're a startup of a few hundred people or a little below, you can kind of get by with not so great docs, because basically everyone knows who everyone else is or what other teams are working on. So when you have questions, you can just ask someone else. But as time went on, Stripe grew and grew, right? And there's a few different facets of that. One is just complexity of the product, and I can symbolize that by showing you this timeline of the number of publicly facing products that Stripe had. It's just what Stripe was becoming a much more complex thing to think about. Similarly, there was a lot of growth in usage, especially during COVID when everyone and their mother was selling things online, and probably a lot of them were using Stripe. So Stripe was growing in its usage, and then also just internally, headcount. This was growing a lot by the time COVID rolled around, especially with this growth in products and usage as well. So all of this came to a head around about 2021 or so, when Stripe had kind of outgrown what its previous internal documentation posture had been. And the state of internal docs was among the highest pain points for Stripe engineers at this time. So, just the combination of all this growth and change in the state of the world, as well as the amount of time that Stripe had been around, that a lot of old stuff was starting to exist and, clog up the airways. It was just a bad time. So to dig a bit more into what specifically this pain manifested as, we measure developer satisfaction generally through a biannual survey. It is called the Developer Velocity Survey, and basically it's just tell us about anything at all that makes your developer velocity worse. And this includes various CSAT measures as well as free-form stuff. And our leadership really takes this seriously as a way to discern what's going wrong with our systems, just in a very broad sense. And offering up solutions to those problems. So Stripe generally trusts this under like developers know what's slowing them down. There are some caveats like the maybe people are asking for faster horses situation. But still, we think this is a pretty good source of pain points. And internal documentation at this time was among the highest. There were a bunch of different kinds of complaints, and we did qualitative analysis on what those actually were and coded them down into a few themes. These themes are kind of entangled, kind of separable, but I'm going to be talking about those in this talk. So here's our agenda, and those are the topics I would want to cover. And I will start with fragmentation. Fragmentation was by far the biggest thing that people complained about in our internal docs culture. Basically just that over the course of the years and as Stripe grew, different teams were putting their docs in different places. So here are some quotes. I am not going to read them out loud to you, but these are representative of the kinds of ways that people felt about our documentation. There are many different platforms mentioned here, and I think my manager has a spreadsheet which has something like 25 different platforms that docs lived on, which is obviously like an untenably large number. And it's really frustrating as a reader when stuff is spread across different platforms. You can't necessarily be sure that a search on one platform is going to give you the right docs you're looking for. You don't even know where to start searching in many cases. And even if you do search, you can feel lost about where to put your new docs that will make sense for your readers. So it's kind of just a sticky situation all around. But what I want to dig into is why exactly there were 25 different platforms. Obviously super painful, but the cause of it, I think, is pretty interesting. Basically, we surmised that this situation is the result of different teams making decisions that made sense for them, but that globally made the situation worse. And what I mean by that is, different teams want different things. Maybe, Team A wants to use Platform X because, let's say, they really like docs as code. They have a lot of documentation that's generated from code, and they want those to live alongside their narrative docs. And then, maybe Team B, they choose Platform Y for completely different reasons. Maybe Team B doesn't they don't mess with docs as code at all, and they just like the editor features of Platform Y. If there's no set standard, then this is like a completely probable situation, right? Everyone can just choose what works best for them, and Team A and Team B are probably reasonably happy with their own choices because they made those choices informedly, and that's what they ended up with. But for everyone else, it kind of sucks now because you have two different platforms where different things are, and they have completely different looks and feels and navigational interfaces, and it's just really hard to find stuff. And the worst part about this, I think, is that it's really self-sustaining. Like, once you have a few different teams with a few different platforms, it becomes the norm that there's no one place to look. Everyone can just do whatever, and that's the way things are going to be. Similarly, it's a lot of effort to move all your docs from one platform to another. So this decision ends up kind of ossifying, where docs just live where they're initially put, and no one ever has the mandate to standardize on one place, so they all just kind of stay where they are forever. This is nobody's fault. Like a lot of quote-unquote cultural problems like this is just kind of an emergent property of the system that different stuff lives different places because it made sense at the time. Yes, those are things I said. So the solution that we thought of was this, and I have a question mark here because there's a very common reaction to build a new platform as a solution, and that platform is that is this comic, XKCD 927, slightly modified. We thought that a new platform was the answer because these problems were definitely not going to solve themselves if everyone just stayed in the ossified state of the world where everything lived in different places. You have to have a single coordination point to move everything to if you are going to solve fragmentation. And that could have been any of the 25 different platforms we had. But as a team, we felt like there's a unique advantage in using a house-built platform as the standardization point, in that you can simultaneously bring a lot of delight to your users. You can give your users what they want. Like the reason that everyone was using different platforms is that nothing worked perfectly for everyone. But if you are an internal platform, then you can have a pretty tight feedback loop with your users, and you can give them what they need. And the other reason is a little more ideological, but it's like we had these other problems that we saw in the documentation culture at Stripe that I'm going to talk about later on. And building a new platform would allow us to have opinionated solutions to these other problems as well. So this is what we built. It is called Trailhead. I am not going to talk about many of the features that are in this, just a few of them, the ones that are relevant to the talk. And I would like to note for posterity that this is not to be confused with Salesforce Trailhead. It has nothing to do with Salesforce Trailhead. And when we were naming it, nobody in the room had heard of Salesforce Trailhead. So unfortunate name collision, but there we go. All right. So the first feature I'm going to talk about, and this is one of the founding theses of Trailhead, is freshness. What I mean by freshness is a few different interlinked concepts. So one here, the first quote says, vetted documentation is what this person is looking for. And that means documentation that a subject matter expert has verified is correct, is up to date. The second bullet point here is, subtly different. They're saying they want docs that are actively maintained. Like they want to have the reassurance that there is someone who is looking at these docs every once in a while. And the distinction that I think is helpful here is that vetted is like a point-in-time property. You can say, as of now, this document is up to date. Cool. Maintained is kind of a continuous property. You can say that for now, until the foreseeable future, such and such a team owns such and such a doc. And the combination of these two things is freshness, like the confidence in knowing that it's correct as of now, and should things change, it will be correct in the future. The thing about freshness is that it's kind of like Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill, like the boulder is your docs. The mountain is like the eternal it's entropy, it's the inexorable passage of time. And we, as documentations, we are pushing a big rock titled our docs. Okay, work with me. Anyways, as the state of the world changes, your docs want to become outdated. No matter what you do, stuff is going to change, and your docs won't change with them. And it requires active effort to make sure that your docs are actually up to date with your code. Well, not just the code, with business requirements, with external dependencies, with all that kind of stuff. And docs can get left behind if they aren't being actively updated like this. There are other factors too that lead to quote unquote doc rot, things like relevant subject matter experts leaving the company or leaving the team, or the team itself stops existing, it gets reorganized into something else. And all of those situations can lead to stuff that isn't as strongly owned as it should be. Stuff that won't remain maintained in the future, and whose vettedness is dubious because there's no one who definitely owns it and will keep it up to date. It's all too easy to keep for things to end up stale if there isn't active effort constantly going in. So, what can we do about this? The solution we came up with relies on this hypothesis that the best way to be assured docs are up to date is with a periodic human stamp from a subject matter expert. Maybe you'll figure this out from the illusions, but we just aren't confident enough that there's anything other than a deliberate human action which can assure you of a document's freshness. Okay, cool. The corollary to this is that documents which are not periodically stamped, which do not have this vettedness property. They wither on the vine. They get automatically deprecated, they get automatically hidden, and maybe deleted, but we haven't reached that point yet. We're scared of deleting things. You should always be scared of deleting things. Anyways, the point is that we want freshness to be an actively maintained property. And there's a couple of things that we think are actually crucial to keeping that up. One is strong ownership. Now, I know different systems do it different ways. In particular, lots of quote-unquote ownership systems designate individuals as the owners of a docs. And I think there are upsides and downsides to that, but our system, it designates teams as owners of docs. And we think that this is resilient to a few different common classes of problems. So things like reorganizations, where people might move from team to team, or they might leave the company. That becomes less of an issue if you have team-based ownership. We also have a primitive at Stripe called a project, which is basically a unit of code, and this is used all over the place in systems that aren't just documentation. And this kind of symbolizes a thing one can own, and we allow that to be tied to ownership as well. And those are kept up with teams as well, but via CI validations, that means that there will always be a valid team assigned to a given project. But anyways, the point is that we really wanted to have a durable team primitive of ownership, because otherwise we didn't think that we would be able to we didn't think we'd be able to keep it up otherwise. And then the argument for person ownership is that if you have a certain directly responsible individual who is the owner of a doc, then they know exactly, your job includes keeping this doc up to date. But at Stripe, we also have something called, we have an on-run rotation, which is like an on-call rotation, but for like, tedious work, answering questions, and dealing with things that bots tell you to do. But anyways, we had a rotation going around each team that allowed us to say, for this week, this person owns all these docs. So we thought that was a good balance between the individual responsibility of personal ownership, as well as the strength of the collective responsibility for team ownership. And then just the other thing is that process is really important. We're trusting our users a lot to keep things up to date and to be sure that their vettedness stamp carries weight. So we repay that trust by making this process of stamping unverified documentation as simple as we can, as quick and delightful as we can even, so that it's that we're showing the trust that we expect to get in return. Here's a screenshot that just that green check mark is really the visible signal of vettedness, and then the line of text that's boxed there is just how we talk about verification within the company. Docs have a shelf life; they need to be actively maintained. All right, so that is freshness. I'm going to talk next about discoverability, and discoverability kind of feeds into the fragmentation piece. These concepts are not entirely separable, but I think there's some interesting things to say here. So these people, they think that documentation is undiscoverable or haphazard, just badly organized, and there are a couple different levels that we think this operates on. So there's discoverability, quote unquote, in the small, which is getting from a doc to a different doc that's maybe relevant or has more information or is just the correct doc for your use case where the first doc wasn't quite. And we have a few things we do here, but none of them I think are particularly innovative. For example, we have a universal search, which works across many different, but not all, documentation sources. And we have a concept of Go linking, which if anyone doesn't use it, you should use Go links. They are basically company-wide bookmarking. And there's a convention, for example, at Stripe, that thing-docs will take you to the docs for the thing. So it's reasonably easy to at least start out with a doc that's probably helpful. I think maybe the more interesting piece, though, is discoverability in the large. And this is the platform scale information architecture. One of the biggest problems with how docs previously were at Stripe is that systems which were designed for a small handful of docs became used for many, many more docs. And it's really hard to get a cohesive view of everything that exists within this universe. We could have tried to use like a comprehensive tree ontology of everything, but that's like really hard. Getting a tree ontology of a X thousand person company and all the engineering knowledge within it takes a lot of work, and I don't think that there is any person at all who would have been able to do that. Like the problem here is that the structure of the documentation doesn't fit into anyone's head. So we thought that trees probably weren't a great idea. Instead, we focused on having many different spaces, which are tightly scoped, small, and relatively flat, and that are interconnected via more of a graph model than a tree model. So small means 20 docs on average, and we have something like 800 or 900 of these spaces. So 18,000 docs or so. Tightly themed, this is through the project abstraction I talked about earlier, where basically a project is a block of code and supporting infrastructure. Docs count in that. So by encouraging project ownership, we encourage making different projects own different spaces, rather than having one team own a space with all of the 10 different projects they have. And then flat, this is kind of a controversial choice, but we really don't like nesting. So we only allow you to nest docs once. So you can't have giant 20 deep hierarchies of things. And we think this helps. And then, like I say, graphs instead of trees. The idea we wanted to go with is that grokability should be local. You should be able to look at a particular space, figure out more or less exactly what's going on in that space and what all the docs in that are doing. And then if you need to get to another space, there's linkage. But we didn't really want to force a tree ontology when it wouldn't make sense to try to load all that context in anyone's head at a time. And there was actually a talk about graphs versus tree ontologies at the Atlantic Virtual Conference last year, which I found really illuminating. So in the left sidebar there, you can see our lack of indentation. That is the maximum level of indentation we can use. And then the box at the top, we have some linkage things, the go links and backlinks between docs. All right, cool. The last theme of feedback that I want to touch on here is this really nebulous thing that I am putting in quotes as doc quality. And basically what that means is just like, we love engineers. Engineers are great. They are not trained as technical writers are trained. And often, the way they write is not the way that a technical writer would write. Thinking about organization, audience, context, purpose, these are things that technical writers, by training, by instinct, automatically think about when writing something, but maybe software engineers don't as much. So this feedback mentions some specific situations where that is. We thought it was really hard to have a technological solution to this problem, because basically what it is like the writing should be better, and humans are like the only thing that can write well. So the way we decided to solve this is we just hired some technical writers, and it's great synergy because the technical writers, they have feature requests or just feedback about the platform that us engineers can work on to make the platform better, and at the same time, the engineers can build those things, but also dispatch the technical writers in cases where docs are failing for these quote-unquote doc quality reasons. So we have a few different kinds of engagements where writers can be airdropped into situations where they're needed, or people can nominate themselves to get their docs improved. And then we also have some, some self-education material where we advocate some pretty simple templates and structures for docs so that engineers can self-serve the kinds of docs that we think good spaces, good documentation should have. So on the left there, those are some of the templates we use, a very small set, deliberately. And on the right, also deliberately a small set, is the kinds of docs that we recommend all spaces have. Cool. And then we actually adopt those in our own. This is our documentation about the platform. On the platform, you can see we have a bunch of FAQs and quick starts. And these are the types of docs that we recommend engineers write for cases where technical writers themselves aren't in the loop. Because we have thousands of engineers and a small handful of technical writers available. So making this process as self-serve as possible, as replicable by engineers as possible without tech writer support was one of our goals there. All right, so real quick, what's next? Finishing migrations is really hard. We've burned down like 5-ish or so of those 25 platforms. We haven't really been trying, but that's still, not nearly as far as we want to go. And hopefully we want to move everything onto our platform when we can. So that's the fragmentation piece. Ceilings versus floors is just a lot easier to have a high ceiling of internal documentation when teams really care about their docs and you're giving them great tools to work with. And making sure that the floor is at an acceptable level is something that we have to work with. And then just like liminal documentation, gaps, edges, errors, stuff that nobody really owns. Someone should probably own it, but it's hard to get around, All right, that is all I have. Thank you all. And for questions, I also have some themes there that I can kind of freestyle on. So if anyone wants to talk about those in the Slido, I can freestyle about those.
Thank you so much, Alistair. What a great talk. Stripes Docs has I don't know if I want to say cult-like, but it's got a lot of fans, and so getting a peek under the hood is so good to have.
I will say, we use completely different technology than Stripe's user-facing docs, so the things everyone's praising for us, not our responsibility.
You could have taken the credit on that one. You could have said, yeah, we're great. We have so much interest in just what you were just talking about, making sure that all of your teams are working smoothly together, fixing, that meme, I'm in this and I don't like it. The fragmentation especially, I really related to. I'm sure lots of people found stuff to relate to in your talk. Our first question is, how did you convince other teams like engineers to use your internal platform, especially if they might have had to migrate from something else like Confluence? Was that a hard sell?
So we are not hitting people with sticks yet. Our philosophy, our philosophy is pretty carrot-oriented up to this point. It's just kind of like a Stripe cultural tenet that people will care about their docs, and by existing as a team at all, we show that organizationally we care about docs. And there's the yet on hitting people with sticks is very much like we're probably going to start being more active in the future, but for now we're just giving our users what they need. We're trying to win in the marketplace of ideas before we hit people with sticks.
It's a multi-prong approach, multi-stick approach. How do you time the automatic deprecation of documentation? Is it date-based or release-based? Douglas is asking whether some content needs different time lengths than others.
Yeah, so for now that is on a 6-month cycle with a little bit of fuzz time in there so that we can say, hey, this is expiring soon, you really need to look at it. We have explored the idea of allowing people to opt into shorter timescales because for some reason people really ask for that a lot, and I don't quite get it, but I'm very grateful. Release cycles isn't really something that Stripe does as much, and a lot of this documentation isn't tied to any particular release of Stripe, so I don't think that one would make as much sense. So time is what we go off of now, and we're pretty happy with a 6-month cadence.
Yeah, thank you. We also have some questions about process and ownership across teams. So we have a couple of questions on process around getting that stamp approval, like sending out reminders, how to make sure it happens in a timely manner, and then maybe sort of a related question about the relationship between the tech writers and the doc owners. How does that all work together?
Yeah, okay. So for the first piece, like I say, at Stripe we have a concept of a runner, and a runner's job is to, it's among other jobs, they are supposed to do menial labor. So stuff that robots are cutting tickets for that is not fully automatable, but needs a human in the loop kind of, but you can automatically cut a ticket. So that fits exactly our notion of re-verification. We need a human in the loop, but it can mostly be automated. So basically, we just assign tickets to the runner when their stuff needs to be re-verified. And then for the second question there about the relationship between our tech writers and our engineers, there's a few different models that our tech writers use. They can be drop-shipped as leadership requires. Hey, people in this org really don't like their docs. They need some improvement. Or even just there's a form people can submit, an anonymous form, which is like, this particular doc or this particular space really needs help. So our writers go there. But like I say, we have many fewer tech writers than we do engineers. So having that space full of writing advice and templates and that kind of thing is a crucial component of our strategy for making sure that the floor is relatively high, not just the limited amount of stuff that our tech writers can actually get to.
Thanks. Speaking of number of tech writers, we've got an evergreen question. How did you convince your org to get headcount for more?
So I was hired after they did the convincing because I'm on the team, so I don't know. But I think that this is a cultural thing as well. Stripe really cares about developer productivity, and this was like very clearly the thing that was most impacting developer productivity. So just being able to demonstrate the scale of a problem, like this is the #1 complaint on our developer satisfaction, is a pretty big problem, is I think the way that you convince leadership.
Not sticks.
Unfortunately, we are not supposed to hit our leadership with sticks.
Good thing it's being recorded, just so people know. We have a little bit of interest on whether Trailhead is available externally or if there are any plans.
We don't have plans to open source it or anything like that. Alas, unfortunately, kind of the way it works is pretty ingrained in Stripe, and things like the project abstraction I talked about for ownership, those are like very Stripe specific. And a blessing and a curse of being an internal only platform is that you kind of get tied into the data models, the ways of working, and just like the metaphors of your company. Trailhead is like very deliberately tied into that there, so I think that there's a lot of things that wouldn't really translate in other orgs, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks. We also have an interesting question about why an internal tool was necessary. They're wondering if you considered setting up federated search across all the different platforms you had. Like, what led to the decision of building something for yourself?
Yeah, so we do have federated search, to be clear. We have a thing that searches many of the platforms. For annoying technical reasons, it doesn't do Google Drive as well, and unfortunately a lot of people are putting canonical documentation that's supposed to be discoverable or something. They're just putting in random Google Docs, which is very sad and not recommended. But I think the discoverability piece is not just about search. It's about where can I, if I already am at a doc, how am I supposed to know whether there's other stuff that should be relevant but happens to be on another platform and I can't see any evidence of it here at all? That kind of question is difficult to answer when you're spread across multiple platforms, even with good search.
Yeah. How do you monitor for duplicate content, especially if anyone is writing their own docs and may not be searching or checking for existing content first?
We mostly do not, and this is suboptimal. I hope it's not as big a problem as it could be. Our hope is that most stuff is genuinely strongly owned, enough such that people would know if there are already duplicate docs, but I guess at some level you can only hope. We have a lot of docs.
I'm going to combine a couple of different questions that broadly have to do with getting internal buy-in. So one question is about extending the systems to internal product teams like platform, security, and networking. How do they manage with tech writers at your company? Any advice if somebody's working at a company that doesn't really have a strong docs culture? Like, where do you start? How do you encourage that ownership and accountability?
Yeah, that's a tough question because it's really hard to shift culture like this on your own. And alas, there is a very strong tailwind we had at Stripe that isn't necessarily going to be elsewhere. One thing I think I would recommend is demonstrate the pain. Like we did with the developer velocity survey, being able to show that this is concretely taking away hours of your engineers' time that they could be using for other things. I think that's a valuable piece of that. And then for the first question about other kinds of things that aren't engineering, we actually, we're starting to expand a little bit beyond engineering, but people like networking and security and many other non-product teams, they love Trailhead as well. It's intended to be engineering-wide, and believe there are a couple of teams in those areas who had their own thing that they were running, like a homegrown-ish platform. They had their own static site generator running, and they were very happy to turn that off and have us take over the maintenance burden of their docs instead.
Great, thank you. And one last question from somebody who's after my own heart. What was Alex Trebek like?
Alex Trebek was a wonderful, gentlemanly human being. He was pretty sick when I met him, but he was a lovely, graceful person, and we all miss him.
Thank you so much, champion of our hearts and of this last talk. Thank you so much, Alistair.